You're listening to the Law Lives Project. I'm your host, Angie Vishianan. I'm a lawyer that launched a startup focused on changing the legal profession through mentorship. Through this podcast, we will explore the early career steps of real lawyers to help students see that many of us didn't have it all figured out at first. It takes time to find your way in the profession, so we want to shed light on some of the challenges people face in the earliest part of building their careers. Each week, I sit down with members of the legal profession and chat with them about the paths they took to get where they are now, including the times they stumbled, the times they fell, and the times they needed a little help. To encourage candor and vulnerability on this show, the attorney guests will remain nameless, but their stories will be laid bare for your consideration. This episode is sponsored by the Princeton Review. For more than 35 years, students and their families have trusted the Princeton Review to help them get into their dream schools. Their mission is to provide personalized, innovative, best-in-class private tutoring, test prep, and admission products and services to help students knock down barriers and achieve their academic goals. They are solely on the side of the students. They are not affiliated with any of the test developers. When it comes to your future, they'll cover you every step of the way. With score guarantee courses, private one-on-one tutoring, webinars, and support articles, you'll never lack the tools you need. Check them out at www.review.com or call 800-2-REVIEW. That's 800-273-8439. And save 20% on your course enrollment with promo code TPRLLP. This week's guest gets up close and personal with us about the struggles of balancing her career with an abusive relationship, divorce, and a professional conflict at work. She was able to gain a ton of skills early on in her career from sampling many different in-house roles, but her greatest challenges came from people problems at work and at home. There's no way for me to express how thankful I am that she was willing to discuss these tough issues that not many people are willing to articulate. So let's jump right in so that you can hear her story in her own words. All right, let's start at the beginning of your journey. Can you tell me, when did you decide to go to law school, and why did you decide to go to law school?
So I decided very late. My entire life, truly since I was a young child, people said like, oh, she's going to be a lawyer. I remember people saying that to my parents all the time. Neither of my parents went to college. It really wasn't on my mind early in life, like exactly what I wanted to do. I was really into music. I liked business, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that.
You know, it's funny that you say that because I think so many people are influenced by the people that are around them. And lots of people say, yeah, my family members said that I should be a lawyer ever since I was small, or my friends used to always say that I should be a lawyer. But I don't really think any of those friends and family might understand what being a lawyer is either. So I think it is hard for a lot of students as they're growing up in high school to figure out, what way they want to go when they get to college. Can you just talk to me a little bit about your college career?
When I went to college, I decided to start as a business administration major, and I attended the University of Central Florida. Somewhere in the middle of my first semester of college, there was like a statistic that was in some like the student newspaper or something that said that like 65% of the students that graduated from my university, which was the second largest university in the country, graduated with a business administration degree. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, it's going to be so hard to get a job if I have the same degree as everyone else. Like I should do something else. And I decided that a pre-law degree would, be close enough to business and be a good, leverage point for me to get a job. So I switched and became a pre-law major.
So you became a pre-law major, and did you really have any intention of going to law school at that time?
As I went through, every class that you basically go through, they would be raising their hands, who's taking the LSAT this semester and what law schools are you applying to, and go to law school career days. And I just wasn't doing any of that because I had no intention of going to law school. I was fighting it. I was fighting it really hard.
So you really didn't have any intention of going to law school then. What happened after you graduated?
So I graduated with my pre-law degree, and then I continued to delay the inevitable, which was going to law school, by getting a master's degree.
And were you also working at that time?
I was running a small nonprofit organization at the time. We basically produced small size like musicals for kids, and I taught voice, piano, acting lessons to children for my own small 501c3 organization. And I decided I should just get a master's degree in nonprofit management so that I could do that better. And it became increasingly clear as I was in my master's program that I was probably going to go to law school.
Oh, so what sparked your interest in law school then?
I started dating this guy who was coincidentally studying for the LSAT. And I'm extremely competitive by nature. And I said, well, I want to study for it and I want to do better than you. Again, still no intention of going to law school. And so we bought a study review course through the Princeton Review, buckled down for like 2 months. And this was fun to me. I thought it was going to be just really fun to study for an exam, learn the exam, and take it.
So it started with a boy. And by the way, I think you're crazy. I am not one of those people that sits and takes the LSAT for fun. So I don't know what in the world made you think that taking the exam and studying for it would be fun. But wow, props to you. You're just one of those people, I guess, that enjoys standardized testing. So how'd you do on the LSAT?
I did very well on the exam, to the point where, I was being contacted by law schools. And I said, okay, I guess I'm going to law school. And so the guy I was dating and I applied to schools, and off we went. And
Well, how did you decide where to go to law school?
I was dead set on going to the New York City area. New York was always my first love. I grew up loving like Broadway and the lights and glamour of the city. I narrowed down my geographic search to the New York area, and I applied to, I think, all of the, New York area schools, and looked at where I received scholarships from. And I came down to between Fordham, New York Law, and Seton Hall Law, which was actually across the river in New Jersey, and ended up selecting Seton Hall because of the more comprehensive scholarship program. I'm trying to eliminate what would be a mountain of debt at the end of law school.
I think debt is a huge concern for a lot of people. I know when I was going to law school, I wasn't independently wealthy. I didn't have somebody who could help finance my legal education, and I was going to be bearing that burden by myself. So I think that that's a very real concern for a lot of people. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you were wrestling with as far as the financial decision to go to law school?
For your audience, I'm not sure of their various places in their legal careers, but for anyone who is, early on and contemplating a law school that isn't yet there, law school is extraordinarily expensive. I was in the group of people that I was fortunate to come in with scholarships, and I'll tell you more about that because I lost my scholarship after my first year. I also had to work throughout law school, which is strongly discouraged in most schools and outright prohibited in others, because of the intensity of the first year program. But the reality of my situation was that I was a first generation college student to begin with. Then I went and got a master's degree, and then I was going to law school. So this was a very significant thing. In fact, many people in my family, while they were very proud of me, were just outright discouraging it because, I mean, you're looking at about $70,000 a year between the cost of tuition, the cost of living, which, if you're not working, needs to be taken out via student loan as well.
Yeah, think back to that time for me. And is there anything that you wish that you knew back then that you didn't know?
Sure. Before I went to law school, I think the first thing that I wish I knew more was exactly who I was. Not what kind of law I wanted to practice, because most people don't. It's not like going to college where half the people know their major, and half don't. Going into law school, most people do not know what kind of law they want to practice. But it's extraordinarily helpful if you are very confident and secure in who you are. The sheer grit of the law school competitive environment is something that will challenge you. It will push you to new limits for yourself. It will test your boundaries. It will test your self-confidence and how you feel about yourself. And you will find out who you are if you don't already know. But it's helpful to have a really strong idea and understanding of the person that you are prior to arriving there. Second, I would wish that I had done a lot more research in figuring out where I could get the most bang for my buck from law school. So I chose Seton Hall, like I said, because it had the best scholarship package, but it still wasn't the least expensive school or the least expensive area to live. It would have been much smarter for me to choose the best law school that was the least expensive, that even if that meant living in a geographical area that was different, because it really doesn't matter that you live in the geographical area that you ultimately want to practice, because you can just take the bar anywhere. I lived in New Jersey and I took the New York and New Jersey bar, but many of my fellow law students, took the bar in Florida or California or New Mexico. I had friends that took the bar in Colorado. So it doesn't require you to live in that particular area. And so I could have saved significant money just by going to law school somewhere with a lower cost of living. And I wish that I had understood that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you're totally right that lots of people go to law school in the geographic area where they don't plan to practice. Ultimately, the choice of which law school is right for you may function on lots of different factors. For some people, it'll be rankings. They're focused on prestige. They want to go work in big law, or they want to go clerk for the Supreme Court, and they want to go to a top 14 law school. For other people, you might be in a very, very niche practice area like me, like intellectual property law, where there may be very few law schools that have good programs focused on that practice area. So your choice of law school will mostly function on which law schools have the programs that you need. For others, it might be cost is the number one factor. Which law school can you go to that's going to give you the least amount of debt? The choice and calculus of what law school is right for you will be different for everyone, and that's totally okay. But students should take a lot of time to put in thought of which law school is the right fit for them. Talk to a lot of attorneys, get a sense of which practice areas you're interested in, and get a sense of how big those practice areas are and whether or not all law schools really teach those practice areas well. Get a sense of whether there are law schools that are out of state that are really, really good in that practice area. Get a sense of how much law school costs in other states. The cost of living might be significantly lower in another state. You can check the ABA 509 reports too, to check the employment rankings for each law school and make sure that a decent number of students were employed upon graduation, and see which types of organizations did they go to. Were they employed by firms? Were they employed by the government? Were they employed by academia? You need to check to make sure that your school is churning out students who are able to get jobs at the types of employers that you really want to work for. And also check if they have good bar passage rates. I mean, what is the point of going to law school if you can't pass the bar and get your license? There's so many factors that they should be thinking about in selecting their law school, and I think a lot of people just don't really put enough thought into it.
And then I guess the last thing that I wish I knew before going into law school, and this is probably just a little bit more about the LSAT generally, is the LSAT really is your key to getting into law school. And of course, everybody knows you need the LSAT, but you don't really understand that it is truly the single deciding factor. I mean, schools will either look at or not look at your application package based entirely on your LSAT score. Truly, the best advice I can give someone for studying the LSAT is to spend 2 months and absolutely buckle down. It is your full-time job to study for the LSAT. And you might not have that luxury if you're still in school or if you're working, but you can mimic that. So you study the test. It's not studying, something rote memorization of facts or math or anything like it would be for the SAT. You're actually studying the test and learning how to take that test. I wish that I was taking it more seriously at the time that I was studying. I would really just urge anybody that is contemplating it to not study for the LSAT how you would study for the SAT or the PSAT. You study for the LSAT, like you're studying for your medical boards. This is a full-time job, and that will give you the most leverage in attending the school you want for the least amount of money.
So while you were at Seton Hall Law School, what extracurricular activities did you pursue?
Sure. So let me start by telling you, I had a very non-traditional idea of what being a lawyer was going to be for me. So I told you how much I fought law because I really liked business. And I decided if I was going to have to be a lawyer, which seemed like destiny was telling me I had to, if I had to be a lawyer, I was not going to spend a day of my life working in a law firm. I had no desire to be a billable attorney. I wanted to be where business was. I usually say that I love to dance in the intersection of business and law. I like to wear my lawyer hat to make business decisions or to advise the business. And I like to use my very good business acumen to inform, legal risk and strategy. So I knew that I wasn't going to do the journal write-on competition because I didn't need to be on a journal for what I wanted to do. I did do moot court in law school, and I found that to be an extraordinarily beneficial training program for me to prepare as a lawyer. Of course, I'm not a lawyer that spends time in court as an in-house counsel. However, the skill set that you develop in there and the way that you learn to think and argue on your feet is, to me, invaluable.
Awesome. What job did you do in the summer between your 1L year and 2L year?
So 1L summer, I did two things. I went and did a study abroad with my law school in Europe for, I think it was 6 weeks. And I had started midway through my 1L year working for a sports and entertainment agency in New York City. Of course, just part-time while I was in school. But so I did that full-time over the summer until my study abroad.
And then when you got back from that summer, did you work during your 2L year?
Shortly after I got back and during my 2L year, I started working for this company, which was basically the concessionaire for 17 different Broadway theaters. And I was hired into a role as like a legal assistant, which I didn't even know what that meant and really seemed more like an administrative assistant when I started. However, like I said, I knew that I wanted a very non-traditional path, and I was willing to do whatever I could to work, quote unquote, in-house prior to graduation, because I didn't think I would have the benefit of waiting until graduation for my career to start. I really believed that I needed to spend most of my time in law school actually being an almost lawyer in-house and experiencing business issues. So I was very fortunate that I think like maybe 6 weeks into my new position as a glorified administrative assistant, someone that had a higher legal director position left the company kind of suddenly. And they were like, we're not going to fill her. You're in law school. You can do the work. And so I got to there was another lawyer in the company, but I got to do a ton of real legal work just by chance, by virtue of the other person's departure.
Wow, talk about being in the right place at the right time.
That was obviously a lot of luck, but it was also me being willing to take a role, like I said, as a glorified administrative assistant, so that I could be in-house and kind of see all of the legal issues and business challenges that, this Broadway company was facing.
How long did you end up working for that company?
So I spent all of my 2L year there, my 2L summer, my 3L year there, and I actually delayed taking the bar exam. I didn't take it right upon graduation because I was involved in this massive project for the company where I traveled to Ningbo, China to source a new product. And this is why I like business, right? Because I was getting to actually participate in a supply chain sourcing event. Got to travel to the Far East with, represent my company, tour factories, meet with quality assurance teams, learn about freight forwarding and all sorts of things that were just very business. The product was basically this adult sippy cup to take your drink into the theater because they're all like national historical landmarks, and they never wanted to have any drinks in the theater for fear of ruining the carpet and the chairs and everything else in the theaters. And so my project was go source this plastic to bring into the theaters, and so that we could let people take drinks to their seats. And so I spent my 2L year, 3L year, and for about 6 months after 3L, finishing, on that project with the Broadway concessionaire. And then I took the bar the following winter. I took the New York and New Jersey bars.
What was your biggest struggle throughout law school?
The biggest struggle was that I had to work through law school. Even though it's strongly frowned upon and in some schools discouraged, particularly your first year, I had to. I couldn't live without working. So for me, it was trying to balance being a full-time day student with, any number of evening jobs and trying to, balance the financial struggle during the 2008, 2009 recession with going to law school at the same time.
And why did you feel like you needed to work during law school? I think you mentioned that you had gotten a scholarship to Seton Hall, so what happened that made you feel this extra pressure to work?
Oh, I mentioned I lost my scholarship. Let me tell you about that. For my scholarship, I needed to maintain a 3.5, and I did not do that, so I lost it. This might be news to anybody that is preparing for law school or even is in law school, because I did not know this is how it works. Law school is grade on a bell curve, so you might have 10 people that get A's, 20 people that get B's, 30 people that get C's, 20 people that, get D's, and some that fail. That's the law school curve. Every class typically has, a requirement of so many A's, B's, C's, D's, F's. Well, if you have, say 50 people in a section, that means only 10 people can get A's. So 40 people in that section are going to lose their scholarship. And that's free money the school doesn't have to give away. It's brilliant on the school's part. It's how they can offer scholarships and know that they'll never have to fulfill them beyond the first year. And I'm not saying every law school does it exactly that way, but if you ask enough questions, I assure you, most schools do something very similar to that. So if you get a scholarship and you go into school knowing that, okay, I'm going to get $40,000 per year, you probably are not going to, or it's likely that you might not be able to keep that if you have a bad semester, a bad first year, whatnot.
Do you have any thoughts for people who are thinking about trying to work full-time or even part-time and going to school at the same time?
I think that to the extent that you can avoid doing it, that of course is the primary thing. Like, it's not like going to grad school or even undergrad where you could balance both. Law school really is a full-time job in class and then a full-time job outside of the classroom. If you can keep your eye on the prize somehow to get through that first year, it's so important. Your first year grades, it's not the most important thing. It is possible, as I've already, discussed, to get through without and to take a non-traditional path, but it is, if you can make it through without working somehow that first year, that will really set you up, not just grades wise, but perhaps financially for the rest of your time as well. I mean, you have to take care of yourself. You have to, really have a good sleep regimen. You have to eat well, exercise well. Of course, fitting all of that in addition to, law school and work is already a challenge. But really, the only way I found to get through was to try my best to take care of myself.
Absolutely. Self-care is so important when you're in law school. Going back a little bit, what I love about your story is that you knew yourself and that you weren't pressured to go to a law firm straight out of law school. You knew you wanted to be in-house and you found a role for yourself. So in a way, you made your own luck. And even though you were given this other position sort of by chance, you really took it by the reins and used it to further your own career.
Yes. And that's what your career will be. You have to be darn good at what you do. Don't get me wrong. You have to work very hard. There's no doubt about that. But there's also luck that is involved with all of it.
Did you do anything else while you were in law school to try to network with industry professionals who were in-house counsels, or what else did you do to try to get in-house?
It was really my work in one particular organization. It was, I think it was called the Sports and Entertainment Law Society. That I mentioned I had worked for a sports and entertainment agency for a period of time, and so I joined this particular society and worked in the leadership of it for most of my time in law school. And what we did twice a semester was we brought in-house practitioners. Of course, I knew I wanted to be in-house, so I was motivated to do this, but also in sports and entertainment, most people that practice there are in-house. There's of course people that work in big law that support, people in-house in sports and entertainment, but most people that work in those fields are in-house inherently. And we brought in like 4 to 8 actual practitioners every semester. We invited people from neighboring law schools to attend as well. And we would have a round table where, we were sitting right there with them, not people presenting down on a panel, but we were literally sitting next to them in a big, actual round table or square table, I guess, where we could ask questions. There was no, format. There was no preloaded questions. It was just like, tell us, kind of like this podcast, tell me about your practice. Tell me crazy things that you remember from law school and the path you chose and why, and how much of it was luck for you and how much of it was you meeting someone by chance or you taking this step to reach out to someone on LinkedIn to make a connection, like those kinds of things. And I found extraordinarily beneficial. Some of the best relationships that I have to this day are people that I brought in for that organization's events. I think we called them industry night.
Now let's talk about your career path after law school. You said that you delayed the bar exam for a little while, finished up your job at the Broadway concessions company, and then took the bar, and then what happened?
Well, let's also just note that everyone in my life it was like, you just spent all this money going to law school and now you're not sitting for the bar. And I was very, very confident in my decision. I was in the middle of a project that I knew would be invaluable to me, and there was no reason I couldn't just sit for the bar the following time. So again, not suggesting that that is the approach that everyone should take, but it was the right approach for me. I had planned my exit from my company on Broadway to coincide with my return from taking the bar. So I think it was mid-March when I had relaxed, had a week or two after the bar exam and picked up and decided to take my next position. So I went then to a real estate investment trust, where I was not a lawyer yet, and I wasn't hired as a lawyer. I was hired as a commercial contract manager. It was a public company. It had just had its IPO a few weeks before I joined. It was a spinoff from another real estate investment trust, and they bought and sold regional enclosed malls. In that position, I really reviewed proposals and bids for construction-related projects, and then did negotiating and drafting of the contracts for with general contractors and architects and various professional service providers. And I stayed there for only a year.
And what led you to leave that company?
I was on an airplane and I had this chance encounter with a recruiter, just happened to be sitting next to me on a plane returning from Las Vegas. And we were just talking about the conference that I was at. And, by like a midway through the flight, we were having a drink and he's like, hey, like, I don't know if you're like ever looking, but I'd love to like talk to you about this role that I'm actually looking for. And I was like, sure. So I basically had an interview right there on the spot on the plane while having a drink, not something that you would do every day. And he's like, yeah, this was great. And got back to New York. And I think I had another interview with someone else in the recruiting agency, the following week. And then they sent me to the company to interview, and I took that job.
Okay, so what did that company do?
They manage, I think it's something like 200 different commercial and residential buildings in the tri-state area. And I worked in the procurement department in contracts and compliance, again, doing similar kind of work, construction contracting for the most part. I worked in that role as the only attorney with a group of 13 procurement and sourcing associates. So I was very busy in that department.
So you only spent a brief amount of time working with the theater company, your first role, and then working with the real estate investment trust company, the second role. So why did you leave those in such short time periods?
One of the best things that someone told me, and I think it was in one of those industry nights that I hosted, was there's limited time at the beginning of your career where you can make a few jumps and not just increase your role and responsibility and your salary, but where you can really get experience in a bunch of different industries as well. And so that's why I was making moves. Like I had done this great work on this project on Broadway. I'd done a lot of cool things in that company, and there was room for me to stay there, I'm sure, as long as I wanted, probably. But like it wouldn't be a growth position for me in the same way that if I went somewhere else, tried something new, learned a different area of law, it's acceptable to do that because I had just graduated, just passed the bar. And each step that you take, you're probably going to get a 10 to 20% salary increase versus staying at the same job, and you might get a 2 to 3% salary increase year after year. I mean, of course, in-house. If you're at a firm, it's different, but so that's why I made a few moves, or I was willing to make a few moves, the combination of more substantively challenging work, more responsibility, and of course the salary.
Okay, so what led you to leave your role at the real estate investment trust company, and what happened in your next role?
My fiance at the time was being reassigned to Pittsburgh for his work. I grew up in Pittsburgh, seemed perfect. I'm like, okay, so let's just take this as a sign to get out of the city, which not everyone does, but I was ready to do. And I went to work for supply chain management and logistics service provider. I was there for also just a year. The company was really going through some tough times financially, and I had really intended to stay there forever. Like I thought I'd just move back to Pittsburgh and go work for one company. I had jumped around a bit, but they were pretty unstable at the time, and so I got lucky by another conversation.
Oh, tell me about that conversation.
When I moved back to Pittsburgh in, I believe, 2014, I was part of the Association of Corporate Counsel, and I was having dinner with another member of the board at one point, and he had suggested to me that I check out this large company that had just come to Pittsburgh and purchased a small private logistics company, and that he had heard through his various contacts that they were looking for lawyers and that perhaps it would be a good fit for me. So I decided to take him up on that, and I pursued that opportunity and was ultimately hired there.
And what role were you hired for?
This company, the public company, came in and decided that they were going to let go of certain key personnel throughout the company, or separate with them in some fashion, and that resulted in there being no lawyers at the company. So this public company came in with their own general counsel, and he created two roles to start building his team. So I actually interviewed for and was selected as the first attorney as they started to build the department. And that's how I was able to get my foot in the door there as a business transactions attorney.
Can you describe a little bit of the work that you were doing in that role?
Yes, of course. It's interesting because when you come in as the first attorney, you do all sorts of legal work because there's no one else. So I was hired primarily to do transactional matters on the sell side, revenue-based contracts in the logistics space. However, the very first day that I was employed there, the company was actually sued. And so this piece of litigation, a complex breach of contract litigation, landed on my desk my first day, but it was actually a perfect opportunity to learn up the business. There's no better way to learn how to contract proactively than to see what went wrong
With the last contract?
So it actually was a really good way for me to get up to speed, and I really valued that. And it gave me the opportunity over the course of my 5 years there to work on other litigation, to almost develop a specialty for commercial resolution of issues, both those that went to litigation and were merely pre-litigation. So I really did the full life cycle of contracting for sales, as well as commercial resolution, risk management on the back end.
You didn't have a lot of litigation work under your belt. This was your first real big litigation type role, right? What were some of the skills you had to learn for managing all of that dispute resolution?
Yeah, so I'll tell you the skill that was the most painful to learn. And it came by virtue of working for a public company that works across several industries. And that is sometimes you have to make strategic decisions in business that have nothing to do with the four corners of a contract. So even if you have a position that is right, even if you are correct, if you value this customer, if this customer spends significant revenue on your business and you don't want to lose that business, you are going to have to operate outside of that contract sometimes. And you're going to have to, despite having provisions that are in your favor, you're going to have to give sometimes, even when you don't have to. So that was the toughest lesson. I didn't like that lesson. The bigger lesson to zoom out there for a minute is that you can't let perfect get in the way of good. We've all heard that phrase, how many times. And even when you're negotiating a contract, we can't take the approach that they really teach us in law school, which is here are the perfect terms of your perfect contract, and they align perfectly with your, risk tolerance or your risk profile. Sometimes to get a business deal done, you have to have an indemnification clause that you don't like.
Yeah, so how long were you in this role at the large multinational company?
I was there for almost 5 years.
Okay. And so explain to me a little bit during that time, what was your trajectory there?
So it was interesting because, as I mentioned, I was the first hire in that department. So I was there when it was, just the general counsel, myself, an admin, and a paralegal. And, we grew quite rapidly over the course of those first 3 years, including like security, risk management, and some other functions within our department, and grew to a department of about 40. So my role actually became more narrow during, my 5 years there, just because we added additional personnel. And I didn't have to do, everything. I was able to, focus, more narrowly on complex customer contracting. It was a relatively flat hierarchy for most of my time there. It wasn't really till the end that we kind of started building out the height of the legal department. And unfortunately, just because of how sometimes things work when you work for public companies, my entire legal department ended up leaving within the span of my last year, as the company was restructuring and combining a few different business units and requiring a move geographically for anyone that stayed. So unfortunately, we all started looking for different jobs. Some people there in Pittsburgh, some people elsewhere.
Can you tell me what were some of the personal and professional challenges that you were going through during that time?
It's also something that's hard for me to talk about, because during my 5 years with this company, I got married, had 3 kids, and got divorced all before I left this company. I was married to someone who was an alcoholic, in and out of recovery, suffered from some mental health issues, as well as some personality disorders that made things very complicated. And the light wasn't shined on that really early on. I was dealing with a spouse who was unreliable as a partner to me and as a father to my children, would be gone for periods of time that, where I wouldn't know where he was, or if he was alive or was coming home.
And when did the marital problems start?
While I was pregnant with my first child, it got very serious. And as is often the case, you always want to believe the best in people, and you want to believe that this is an exception, not the rule. You want to believe that this person is just struggling. And that's how I looked at it. I looked at it as like, this must be so hard for him, like to feel so isolated and alone, and that he's just taking this out on me because I'm here and he doesn't feel like he has anyone else. And that went on. I mean, which is why we stayed married, why I kept having children. But I was trying to deal with all of that at the same time as like managing a career, managing a transition to motherhood, and then trying to be a mom basically, 24/7, because I didn't have a partner to rely on.
This episode is sponsored by Crescendo. Crescendo helps law students crush finals, the MPRE, and the bar. With hundreds of mnemonics and illustrations, thousands of official NCBE practice questions, affordable pricing, lifetime access, whiteboard videos, plus audio outlines and audio flashcards, Crescendo is revolutionizing legal education. Unlike some competitors who require expensive deposits, Crescendo offers the opposite: a 30-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. Most everyone sticks around. The 5-star reviews explain why you should try Crescendo. Matthew from Harvard said he wished he had Crescendo as a 1L. Visit crescendo.com to learn more. That's CRUSHENDO.com. Also, use promo code LawLives15 with no caps or spaces. That's LawLives15 to get 15% off on any of Crescendo's innovative bar prep material. And now, back to the episode. What was the ramp down process like when you went on maternity leave to have your first child?
So the ramp down was fine. I worked all the way up until I had my child, the day before I had my child. For me, I was just going to be sitting there, and I wanted to just keep working. It was easier for me to keep working.
When did you find out that your partner was an alcoholic?
Let me think. This is when my son was 6 months old. So this would have been probably a year and a half into my time at this company. I was working in my office, and I just had this mother's intuition of something being wrong. At the time, he was unemployed and my son was home with him. And it was in the middle of the day, and I just felt like I needed to go home immediately. And I did. And he was passed out, drunk in the middle of the day. My son was laying on our king size bed, also sleeping, but if he had woken up, he would have rolled right off the bed. And that was the beginning of it. I remember one time that he was missing for days, swallowed a bunch of pills and overdosed. And I took him to the hospital and then went straight to work. And nobody ever knew. To this day, nobody ever knew.
So after having your first child and then learning that your husband was an alcoholic, what was the transition like as you went back to work?
I wanted to go back to work, but I wasn't quite sure how to manage the emotions of being away from my child. Because for me, going back to work didn't mean my son was going to daycare. Because my husband was unemployed, he was staying with my son. So I felt like it was actually harder for me. It was actually is my son going to physically be okay because my partner was unreliable? So for me, it was a very difficult struggle going back to work, trying to stay focused professionally when I felt like there was this chaos behind the scenes that nobody really knew about. Coming back, I went back to work full time, but I would do 2 days in the office for a month. And then the next month, I think I went to 3 days in the office and kind of ramped up that way.
What was it like over the course of the next couple years when you had your second child and then your third child?
So I will say that when we had my second child, that was probably the best shape that my ex-husband was in. He was getting help. He was sober for most of the time that I was pregnant, and after I had shortly after I had the baby. That was not a difficult time, which was great because that coincided with the time I was going through this kind of hell situation at work.
Okay, tell me about the hell situation at work.
I can tell you about a situation that was really, in my decade of practice, the hardest. And it's actually an interpersonal professional situation, not one that was really substantive.
Oh gosh, sometimes the people problems are always the worst. They're always way harder to deal with than actual substantive legal issues.
And I don't feel like they get enough attention really because it's, I think, assumed that, we will just deal with any people problems that come up. However, sometimes people problems are really big, or sometimes people problems are problems that prohibit the effective functioning of a group.
Well, and depending on the magnitude of the problem, it could almost derail your whole career. I mean, at a firm, if you rub someone the wrong way and they don't want to give you work anymore, it can really change your career trajectory.
That's very true. And I was in a spot, it's about halfway through my employment at this company. I was at a spot where I actually thought I might lose my job. I was a valued trustee of our general counsel. As I mentioned, I was the first hire there, so just by virtue of being there first, there was a very good relationship that I had with the general counsel. And I think he grew to really trust my professional opinion and involved me in a lot of really great projects. However, that led to some jealousy within the other department, which I didn't realize. And it led to some people thinking that, I was perhaps a favorite of the general counsel. The general counsel spoke to me about some plans that he had for the future of our department. And I shared those with one of my colleagues who I didn't realize was very envious of the relationship that I had with our general counsel, the relationship being a professional one, of course, not insinuating otherwise.
And was this colleague male or female?
A male colleague that I knew and recommended for hire at the company. Someone that I had worked with before, had a great working relationship with. He was looking for a job. We were hiring, and I fought for him to get this job, and he did. Over the course of some time that passed, I think that he and some others, actually, he wasn't alone, became quite jealous of my role in the department. And I was completely blissfully ignorant of that fact, mostly because I was having babies and getting married and doing all these other things that just led me to not be focused on the perception of me by others in the department.
And how did that impact you professionally? When did it finally come to a head?
So it came to a head because I'll never forget, I was newly pregnant with my second child, maybe in that early time before anybody knows you're pregnant. I remember because I was already going through morning sickness, and I was having all sorts of nausea while I was at work. And my boss called me into the office and he said, "Close the door, we need to talk." And he told me that there was a perception of my favoritism within the department, and that I had broken his trust by confiding in my male colleague something that he had told me. It was not something, extremely confidential. It was just more, he was saying something kind of off the cuff, kind of expecting that it would be kept between the two of us. And I shared it out of excitement. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have, but I didn't share it for a nefarious reason. I just shared it because it was exciting and he was talking about what he envisioned for my future at the company.
Gosh, that must have been so hard because I'm sure whatever your boss shared with you was probably something positive, and then all of a sudden it turned into a negative.
Right. And my general counsel thought I failed here. He thought that that was something that I should have kept to myself. And he thought that the team thought I was using some inside lane that I had to gain professional traction. And that perception was really dangerous. One thing I've learned in business is perception is reality. Unfortunately for me, I was devastated and I felt like I had nobody that I could trust. I felt like, okay, so if the whole team feels this way, then I'm the problem. I'm the one that they're going to have to get rid of. And I don't know how to repair that trust or try to make it better because the way I looked at it, I was just doing my job.
Tell me, what did your boss say in that conversation? Did he give you a solution on how to address this issue, how to repair his trust, or what did he say in that conversation?
Great question. And let me start by saying this is the best boss I've ever had in my career. This is a boss that invested in me and believed in me. And instead of just cutting off the rotten arm, and letting go of that tree limb that was causing the problem, he leaned into me. He said, "You have to trust me here. You're going to need to lay low for a little while. You're going to need to not be the person that speaks all the time in every meeting. You're going to have to listen a lot more. And you're just going to have to buy time. Just fly under the radar, do your work, don't go out of your way to be overly engaged with other people. I will adjust to the workload that I give you so that it's not so many projects with your legal colleagues. And I hope that this will be," he said, "I'll never forget, I hope this will be a blip on the radar of your career at this company." And he made sure that it was. I will tell you that I didn't like it. It was extremely stressful to me.
Did you think that that was the right approach, though?
Let me say yes and no. Yes, because I ultimately kept my job. I ultimately went to do incredible work and be very successful following it. However, I think it was more what was easy for the department and not what was easy for me. I think that he looked at me and saw that like I could handle whatever it was going to be. But I don't really think that it was fair to me. I think it would have been more fair to give me an opportunity to like address and to say to these colleagues like, I'm sorry, like I'm so sorry this is your perception of me, to just kind of hit it, or to make a forum where people could kind of air their grievance or whatever it was. To me, I understand why he didn't do that. It might have made it worse, but I felt like I was walking down the hallways and like people were whispering about me. I'm sure that they weren't, but that's what it felt like. It felt like, I suddenly had my eyes open to a bunch of colleagues who basically it felt like they didn't like me.
That's so hard. That's so hard. And I mean, these are people you're working with every day, right? I mean, they're all in the legal department?
We would go to the point where we would have department meetings and the lawyers would generally sit together and I would just sit as far away as possible. And I asked him, like, is that what you want me to do? And he said, just buy time. Time will help, but I felt like there was no meaningful opportunity to address it. And so it just kind of felt like, all right, well, let's just see how long this takes. And it took a year.
Now, you told me that you were going through all of this after you had just had your second child. So, can you tell me what it was like to just balance being a mom and a spouse and dealing with all of these professional challenges at work all at the same time?
So it was quite difficult. The hardest part for me really was trying to not pretend that everything was okay when I was at work. I actually found doing substantively challenging work was a good way for me to escape what was happening at home. It gave me something to focus on and to that was just beyond being a mom and beyond being a wife. Like it was a role that I knew how to do well. So I actually found a lot of escape there. It was hard for me though to explain my random or periodic absences where I would have to go take care of or clean up after some sort of mess that was going on at home. Fortunately, like I said, I had a very good boss who invested in me, who knew of the situation, my situation at home. It's a public company, and they had very strict, like, anytime there was domestic incidences or anything, they wanted that to be disclosed just to your immediate supervisor. So he was aware of that. But so that's my second child. In the process of getting there was fine, and then shortly after we had our second child, he really entered a very long period of relapse that really didn't conclude until a month before our divorce was finalized.
Yeah, so when you came back from maternity leave from your second child, was that when things had finally blown over with your interpersonal struggle?
That's when they started to marginally get better. That was really when there had been enough time that had passed where I would start to intermingle with my colleagues slowly. I was still very hesitant to do so, but that was really where it started to return to normal.
And when do you think it finally subsided? When did you finally feel like you were in the clear?
To be honest, I never felt completely in the clear again. I felt in the clear, like I wasn't going to lose my job, but I never felt it never returned to the way that it was. And perhaps that was my hesitation and lack of desire to trust them the same way again. Or perhaps my eyes were opened and I saw it differently, but truly it didn't return. I was the best group of people that I have ever worked with. I will say that to this day. But the relationship really, it never went back completely the same. We were able to all work together. We worked well together. Probably even all liked each other, but it was never the same as it was.
And where did you find support in all this time? I mean, did you feel alone? Did you have family or friends you could confide in? Were you confiding in colleagues?
I didn't confide in colleagues. For years, I kept everything that was going on pretty close. I didn't share with too many people. I think there was just two people that I really confided in. And then I found a codependency support group through my church that really helped me understand why I was still in this kind of relationship and why I felt, the need to take care of everyone all the time and ahead of myself. And it really helped me to start opening my eyes. I had a lot of support from my church pastoral staff. I would have people that they knew of the situation and they would check in on me. I had people offer to come cut my grass and bring me groceries when I'm have two young toddlers and I'm pregnant with a third child, and my husband was nowhere to be found. Like I had a lot of support through my church, and I had family around as well. But there is also a part that is you're hesitant to go into too much detail. Like you kind of want their help and their support, but it's hard to explain why. It's hard to to avoid the obvious questions of, well, why don't you leave? Which are not always helpful to people that are in abusive relationships. And so I really struggled. I struggled kind of carrying it alone until I was willing and ready to see that, like, this isn't a manageable life. It's not safe for me or my children. And to try to navigate the waters of getting out of that while continuing to focus professionally and to not let that completely derail me.
What finally led you to leave the logistics company?
um, well, as I mentioned, the company was doing a corporate restructuring of several different business groups. So there was an exodus of my entire legal department, our finance department, and our engineering department over the course of a year. And over that time, I was looking for other employment, as were all my colleagues, and was presented with an opportunity in Florida. I had went to college in Florida and had truly wanted to move back for quite some time, and it came together very quickly. It finalized in the same week my divorce finalized, so it seemed like perfect timing to move on and just kind of put my a whole new beginning, together for myself.
And can you describe a little bit about what your company does and what you do in your new role?
Yes. So I always say hashtag space lawyer is what I am now. What we do is manufacture satellites that are launched into lower Earth orbit, as I mentioned. that are intended to provide telecommunications services around the world and basically bridge the gap for the nearly 50% of the people on the planet that do not have, broadband internet access. So in my role, our company is, I think, approximately 300 people strong right now. And I am responsible directly for all of the transactional activities in our supply chain. We work with anywhere between, 40 and 50 suppliers that provide us various parts, hardware components that go into our satellites that we assemble in our factory here in Florida. And so I manage all of the very complex commercial transactioning with those suppliers. I work through our, resolving any commercial issues that come up in the interim with these suppliers or with their performance or, sometimes ours. I work with our senior management team, advising generally on business strategy, compliance, licensing matters, occasional regulatory developments, things generally in the industry.
And now you're a single mom of 3 kids, right?
I'm a single mom. I have my kids 100% of the time, which is the best blessing in the world, and also the most interesting in a time where school closes for 6 months or daycare is closed for 6 months, and I still need to work. But I was very fortunate to have the help of a nanny this year that we had already engaged prior to the pandemic happening. So I was already familiar with her and knew her, and she made the move to Florida with us and helped take care of my kids so that I could work like half days, and then when everyone would go to sleep, I'd work the rest of the day.
For all of our listeners, during the time that this was recorded, we're all going through the COVID-19 pandemic. So I asked our guest, what are some of the challenges that she's going through uniquely at this time in juggling being a mom and juggling her career?
The greatest challenges to me during this pandemic with those two things are just feeling like I'm giving everyone enough, and trying to balance that with some self-care for myself. However, one thing that I have really learned this year and what I'm most proud of is the fact that we simply made it through. And my kids are happy, they're healthy. I am employed. My company is doing well. I am doing well at my company. And sometimes just because things aren't perfect, just because I can't be everything to everyone 100% of the time, doesn't mean that who I am and what I'm giving isn't enough and isn't damn good.
I am so thankful that you came to share your story today because I think it includes a lot of things that our profession is not comfortable talking about. The family issues, the professional struggles, the challenges that we bear. And I want to change that with this podcast. I want us to all start getting involved in the dialogue of how can we improve our profession? How do we make it better for people who are coming behind us to be more comfortable as lawyers?
I think that one thing that is really helpful is to just stop playing a comparison game, to stop looking from, not just talking on social media. I'm talking generally. Like, we look at some women who have these great careers but don't have children, and we say, well, why don't you have children? Or we look at stay-at-home moms and we say, well, why don't you have jobs? Like, whoever you are, personally, professionally, is fine. We have the freedom of choice. So I think we should be careful that when we ask questions that they don't appear judgmental. I also think that, this is a societal change. This is particularly coming out of a pandemic. Women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Not just do women make 79 cents to the dollar, for the same work that men do, but women disproportionately work in healthcare. The most essential workers. Women are disproportionately teachers who have to be in the classrooms. Women do a disproportionate amount of domestic work. And with children at home and in school, and not in school or doing virtual school, it is primarily women that are expected to play, homeschool teacher as well, or to at least facilitate that. So I think the expectations are quite ridiculous, and we have to work to change that as a society. It's going to be a slow step in the right direction, but we have to get there. It's really important.
In your role right now, has your employer done anything to help, kind of special to support you during this time? Anything that you've liked about their approach?
Well, I have a lot of compliments for my employers in how they've allowed us to adjust hours so that we could both, parent our children and do our jobs. Being able to work remote for as long as we have. I also have some complaints. Like, we have a back to work mandate in my office right now, which is unnecessary as we're in at least today, currently, the highest number of COVID cases ever recorded in one single day for like a record, however many days in a row. So, like, I find that there are some things that just because traditionally they make people feel better when they're in the office. Okay, we know people are being productive. It makes us feel good, or, we're paying this office lease and, we want to get some use out of it. So, I mean, I have complaints and compliments. I will say, generally speaking, that my employer has been very flexible.
Well, I know our time is coming to a close, so do you have any final words for our listeners?
So again, I think my career path is a very peculiar one and not necessarily the most common path, but that's actually exactly where my vice is going to lie. You will be told prior to law school, when you're in orientation and every day that you are in law school, that there is one path to take, that you are required to or need to get the very best grades, do nothing else, that you have to take a clerkship your first summer. You have to have an associateship by the time your second, summer, and that's how you're going to get your law school job at the end of law school, excuse me. That is not the only path. I know mine is a very narrow, kind of carefully dictated and crafted path, but there are lots of other paths. Only 10% of people that go to law school can be in the top 10% of the class. That means everybody else, 90% of the people, are not. And all of those people, when they graduate, guess what? They're still lawyers. I had a professor, I think, that said something along the lines of like, you move the mountain 1 inch at a time. Don't look at the end of the road and think like, oh my gosh, this is so far to go. When you're studying for the LSAT, and you're just at the very beginning, or you're studying for the bar and you see like, oh my gosh, I have 2 or 3 months of this. Like, how am I ever going to learn all of this information? You will do it. You absolutely will. Can't remember who said this to me, but someone said, this too will pass and so will you. And it was like the best advice I could have in law school. Like, you will get through it. You will pass. You're not going to fail. You will make it. And whatever path that you take is going to be worthy of you and your service. Remember that as lawyers, we are ultimately professionals that provide a service to people. We help people, and like, never forget the mightiness of that mission. It is truly the best calling. I'm so glad that I stopped fighting myself and went to law school and became a lawyer. It is truly my life's passion project. I'm very glad that I don't work in an area of law that is more emotional, like family law or criminal law or anything like that, because I like being very emotionless in my practice. But it is truly, it gives me such purpose. And I really would just suggest to anyone to remember that this is an aspirational path. So many people would wish to have the opportunity to go to law school and to practice as a lawyer. And if you're going to do it, give it everything you have. You really can do incredible things in service of others as a lawyer. It's truly the best work.
This episode is sponsored by Sherry Bellett's Communications.
Hi everyone, this is Sherry Belletts from Sherry Belletts Communications. Do you have a case which needs a liability or damages evaluation for mediation or trial? I help lawyers use psychology to achieve favorable litigation outcomes with my strategic focus groups, mock trials, and jury research services. If you would like to learn more, please email me, sherry@sherrybellets.com. Thank you.
All right, everyone. That's it for today. Thank you to our guest speaker, and thank you to all of you for listening to another episode of the Law Lives Project. If you're a prospective law student that's interested in speaking with attorneys one-on-one, check out leguplegal.com. LegUp Legal is an online mentoring platform that connects prospective law students with attorney mentors. Sign up for a membership today to learn more about the practice of law and see if it's a good fit for you. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes or any other platform that you're listening on. If you have any questions or comments about anything you heard on the podcast, or if you have ideas for guest speakers, please contact me by emailing me and my team at info@leguplegal.com. Thanks again, and don't forget to tune in next week.